Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. Error monitoring is by Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Hey there, this is Adam, and I want to tell you about our friends at Linode, our trusted place where we host everything. Everything that we do is on a Linode cloud server. Head to linode.com/changelog. Get one of the fastest, most efficient SSD cloud servers out there. Nearly 500,000 customers trust Linode, as we do too. Once again, linode.com/changelog. And now onto the show. All right, welcome back, everybody. This is the Changelog, a podcast featuring the hackers, leaders, and innovators of open source. I'm Adam Stacoviak, editor-in-chief of Changelog. Today on the show, we're talking to Rhys Arkins about Renovate app, which is automated dependency updates. It's flexible, so you don't have to be. We talked about Renovate's configuration, who's using it, the languages and environments that are supported, self-hosted versus SaaS, and how that plays into supporting his open source, auto merging, being a GitHub app, and being in the GitHub Marketplace, and also building this as a business on someone else's platform.
So Renovate is a project that hit our radar because of ping. And specifically, we have to give a shout out to Nicholas Young, whose name and avatar rings a bell, so I think he's probably submitted before, who told us you got to have Rhys Arkins talk about Renovate. And Nicholas gave it this compliment. He said, "It's the first GitHub app that has changed how I develop software by easing the frustration of managing dependencies, for the most part, automatically." And he gets bonus points for not saying auto-magically. One of my least favorite nerdy words. So that's quite a compliment, and we'll get into that. We're happy to have you here, Rhys. Real quick, we do want to take a quick moment before we do that and talk about ping and some changes that are happening with ping. So for those who don't know, ping is our open inbox on GitHub, github.com/thechangelog/ping. And for years now, we've taken submissions there, ask us anything style posts, questions, feedback. Most importantly, I think show ideas. And if you've been listening to the Changelog for a while, a lot of our best shows are because of our community who've submitted the ideas to ping, this show being one of those. So we love that. We want that to continue happening. However, we've also been taking news and article submissions like projects, articles, blog posts. We love those as well. We no longer want those on ping, however, because we've actually built a version of that into the website where you should submit instead. Adam, you want to tell them about that?
I think it can summarize best with the update to the README, which says this is no longer the place to share projects, articles, and news, because changelog.com/news/submit is the new URL for that. And what you can do when you go there, it will actually ask you to sign in and create an account. But the important thing is that you can share with us like links, articles, whether you wrote it or not, and that gets served into Changelog News, our homepage, and then potentially can hit Changelog Weekly, which is a highly sought after, beloved newsletter we ship every single week. So if you're not subscribed to that, I would suggest you go to changelog.com and you will see an option to subscribe and just follow that lead and do that. So ping is for show ideas, and the evolution now is to share your news through changelog.com/news/submit.
There you have it. So Rhys, let's get to Renovate. Let's hear your story and this app that at least you got one happy customer, Nicholas Young, it's changed his life a little bit. So tell us about Renovate, what it is, and the backstory of how it came to be.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to Nicholas, of course. So Renovate is a command line tool that has also been adapted to also be a GitHub app, which is what Nicholas refers to. But primarily, it's a command line tool that is used for automating dependency updates for projects such as JavaScript and Docker files and a few things like that. And it automates it using branches and pull requests in your existing project to try to fit in with the workflow you already have.
Very straightforward. How about the backstory? Why did it come to be, and how did it come to be?
Yeah, so Renovate is not the first to actually do this. I was using another tool called Doppens for a project of mine, and it was a web app. and Doppins was really good, but I broke the app into, you could say, like a monorepo with Docker containers where they each had their own package.json. And that meant that I couldn't keep using the automated pull requests from Doppins. And none of the tools that were available at that point, or the apps, supported having a package.json, a dependency file that was outside the root of the project. So I just didn't have it anymore. And a few months later, I had a problem which was affecting up to 5% of users. Weird errors getting caught in my Sentry reporting, and I probably spent 2 days trying to figure out what was going on. There was actually another developer one day, myself a day. And eventually we discovered that it was a really strange bug that had been fixed by Google's Firebase like a month earlier or something. And I just decided never again, because that was like a really, I couldn't even tell exactly how it was impacting users. You're getting exceptions thrown, but you don't know for sure what they're seeing or what's failing for them. And 2 days of developer time as well. It's too much. So I decided to hack together a script. And basically, almost like a bash script with, git commands, git branch, git pull, git checkout, git push, combined with just a little bit of JavaScript to make the pull requests.
Just want to comment on the fact that so many awesome projects begin with, so I decided to hack together a script.
Yeah.
How many times do we hear that?
Lots.
Yeah, this is absolutely one of those cases of like necessity or whatever. And so I worked out how it could be done, but I kept, again, it was like another week. So I paid a freelancer. I just advertised it and found someone who wrote that. And by the time he finished it, I realized that I didn't actually need to use Git. They actually, GitHub themselves provides like a Git API. So somewhat, for no real good reason, but I decided to rewrite it then myself using pure API. And there it stood and it worked. And so at that point, it was still just a script that I was using. And I was thinking like, maybe I should open source this. And then I had the idea that I would open source it for like SEO reasons, search engine optimization, because I was working on a real estate site. I still have it. And I had this thing where whenever I would open source something, I would pick a name that was relevant to real estate. And so I already had one project called Lint Condo, which was a lint container for Docker. And that one actually got in, Docker.com's newsletter and things like that. And I got some links back to my blog. Another one I released was called Home Inspector, which was, another like screenshot regression testing. And for this one, then I hit on the name Renovate. And it was only when I got the name, I thought, that's a perfect name. And that I decided to open source it. And I thought, well, I blog like an announcement about it. And there'll be a few sites interested in it. And I get some links back to the site because it's just a bootstrapped real estate site with no advertising budget. And that was basically my first reason to open source it. So it came out of necessity while I wrote it, open sourced it for search engine optimization. But then people actually discovered it and used it. And kind of like out of like obligation or pride, when they would say, this is really cool, I just need this, or can you add that? I started doing it.
When was that? Like what year was that?
That was about 1 year ago. That was around like, I think January of 2017.
Okay.
Curious, before you go further, how does the SEO impact the naming? Like, maybe I'm missing it. What is the reasoning there for that?
Well, I mean, Google still fundamentally works on, backlinks, like if you're important, people link to you.
Right.
And, but then Google, of course, tries to work against like gaming of the system. You can't just spam a bunch of links or spam keywords and things like that. But like if real legitimate sites link to you, then, that kind of counts. And that's what they use to decide whether you should be high enough or not. And but part of it though is that they also are smart and they filter out if links seem to be completely irrelevant to what you're doing, such as in my case a real estate site. But if people link to you with an anchor that says like Renovate or Home Inspector or Condo, then in my like theory that should hopefully be good enough to sort of to bypass that a little bit. So, and I didn't really see anything wrong with that because, people are linking because it actually is something useful. And like, it's always fun to have a naming convention.
No, I love
Things
it.
you
Yeah.
do. So that was what sealed it for me, was like, okay, I'm gonna release it and I'm gonna give it the name Renovate, and people are gonna link to my blog, which is hosted on the same domain as my website, and that'll be worth it. Better than paying some SEO person, like $1,000 to like give me some like spam kind of links that don't look spam. Like, I may as well actually do something useful.
So does it actually feed back into your real estate site too? Is that part of the point?
Well, it was more just that where when I put it on the blog, the blog saying, here's what I wrote, because I didn't have any renovateapp.com or anything then. The point was that people would link to that,
Gotcha.
which describes it, and of course then go to GitHub and use it. But apart from that, it wouldn't really have anything to do with. I actually had a separate sort of blog page on the real estate site called like Our Tech, to separate out like real estate blogging from open source work.
So here's a big picture question related to all of this, and something that I've thought about sometimes is when we're talking about real estate, like domains are online real estate, and something that I'm a believer in is like owning your own real estate and not putting all your pearls on other people's platforms. So syndicate, right? So like with changelog.com, we write for our website and we syndicate out to these different media, to Twitter, to Facebook, to even micro.blog. Now we're syndicating, so RSS. But like everything comes back to that one place, and that's really what you're doing when you blog about it on your real estate site, is you're linking everything back to there. But one thing that all of us developers don't do is we don't host our own Git repos. We don't host our own documentation. We don't host our own stuff. And so ultimately, we're giving all of the last mile to GitHub, because we're hosting our actual things there where people are linking to and spending their time to GitHub. And I know, I think it was Patrick McKenzie back in the day, Patio 11, who's become kind of internet famous in developer circles / entrepreneurial circles because of all of his writing around entrepreneurship and what have you. And he made a split testing Ruby gem years ago, and he refused to put it on GitHub, or maybe it was on GitHub as well. But like everything he did was he hosted that. It was open source, Git, all that, but he hosted it on his website. And the reason was the reasons that I'm saying. So I'm curious if you guys have had thoughts about that, and if we're all just kind of giving all of our Google juice to GitHub.
Yeah, I mean, not. I don't have too much concern with that part, because I think it's partly to do with how closely related your source code is to your main sort of website. Even if you're going to self-host, you're most likely going to end up putting it on git.renovateapp.com or something like that. So it's still technically going to be like a separate domain. I think GitHub did a really great job of sort of capturing the open source market
For sure.
all that years ago. And, opinions differ about how much they keep doing to like retain it. And you can debate for a long time about does the community owe GitHub, or does GitHub owe the community? I mean, they're hosting stuff for free, and, they don't put ads and things like that. They don't sell your details. So, you're not quite the product.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
What do you think, Adam?
That's a good question, because we link out to lots of open source. And whenever I have a chance to link to somebody's landing page, which is usually their domain versus the repo, I will more often than not link to their homepage. And then in the details of promoting this new thing or describing what's going on, here's also the source on GitHub. Because I feel like what you feel like, the hub and spoke model. I feel like people should own their content, and I don't have anything against GitHub and the open source. I just feel like the legitimacy
strategically,
of
it's smarter.
Yeah, I feel like giving it to them first, because a GitHub README looks like GitHub. It doesn't look like a branded version of X. And sometimes, like Homebrew, you go to Homebrew's website, beautiful looking site, documentation's clear. You can easily see that it's on GitHub. You can see all the other things they can advertise. You're removing their ability to better communicate to their community by only linking to their README, which is essentially the GitHub repo.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. Like these days, I have renovateapp.com, which essentially is for the app part, not so much the open source. I mean, as in it's intended for people who don't care too much about the source. They want to use the app. And I tried to like filter out all the stuff about how to host it yourself and so on, because that just confuses people if you give them options that aren't actually valid to an end user. So I tend to adjust where I link to depending upon like the audience or what they're after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I certainly would want to self-host my Git.
Yeah, it's a matter of convenience in that case.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah,
GitHub owns that. They do a great job. And like Rhys said, do we owe them or do they owe us? Are we the product? I think the open source community is the product because, GitHub they're giving it away, but at the same time, they're getting so much traffic. They're getting so much authority. Think about all the Google juice that's going to them, Rhys, that you're after. Like, imagine the exact opposite. Like, we've been linking to GitHub for years. Not that we're a big source for their juice, but multiply us by, 10,000 other media outlets. That's
right.
Linking to GitHub. They're getting a lot of benefit.
Yeah. It's an ecosystem. Everybody gets things out. And I agree, it has to do with convenience. I guess my takeaway from this is kind of what you said, Adam. Specifically, like, have your own homepage. Sure, host your code there on Git. All the tools are there. Your clones can be off GitHub or what have you. But if you have an open source project, and it's not just like a throwaway, like I have open source stuff that is just throw it up on GitHub and whatever. But if it's actually the thing that's in support of a goal of yours, like it is the case with Rhys with his Renovate and his other tools, where they're trying to provide some benefit back to his business. Well, have a homepage for that and own that domain, right? So if GitHub goes away or you ever want to move off it or whatever, you're not tied to that URL. You're tied to a URL that you own. And then sure, so host the source code where it makes sense. Cool. Well, that was off topic.
That was a fun aside, though, I think.
These are the things that I think about, and then I hear somebody talking about it. I'm like, wait a second, I've been thinking about this too. So
yeah.
I'll put a little bit back on. I would say that with open source, did actually notice that there are companies that do try to use their open source to sort of bring attention to themselves. They host their open source page on their main domain or on a domain important to them. I've seen others, but I forget now, that do sort of use names that are aligned with their business. I don't know if they're like me, and they're like desperate for backlinks or if they just think it's cute to have a naming scheme that reflects your company. But I think a lot of companies could probably do better to host their own open source subpage and use that to focus them.
I agree.
Focus attention a bit more.
Absolutely. So that's the backstory of how Renovate came to be. You created it as a scratch your own shell script. You open sourced it for Google Juice, and because you had a cool naming convention going that you wanted to. By the way, Renovate's a perfect name, so I know why you hopped on that and felt good about it. It's very plays very well, especially now knowing that you're in the real estate business. It makes it even more poignant, I guess.
Yeah. And from there, it required a few little like rocket boosts, I think, to be where it is today, at the very early stage. And, one was when one enterprise user mailed me just out of the blue and said that, like the tool was actually like really important to them right now, and they'd hate to see it just sort of die, and like, would I consider a way of getting paid for it kind of thing? Like, they want to see it alive, and they understand. And, I declined that. I said, thank you very much. It's not really necessary at this point. But that was like a really good motivator that, people felt that, found it that useful. And the second one was when another person from an enterprise posted about a year ago and said, like, would you object to switching to the Jest testing framework? Because like, it's much better, and I'd be able to submit like quite a lot of tests for you if you did that. And I'm just looking at that from my mobile. I was on holiday at the time and just going, okay. So I think I literally replied like, well, sure. I mean, I can't say no to somebody promising me to add tests kind of thing, like try to reinforce like, okay, that's what you offered. And sure enough, switched it to Jest, improved a lot of things. I was not a testing expert, and improved the test coverage a lot. And that was basically, I think, him thinking that, well, we use this and I don't want to see you breaking it on me, so I'm going to add tests for the stuff that I know is important to me, so that you at least get you at least get notice if you break stuff that I need. But that was also like really shocking to me that someone would do that. It was probably like 2 days worth of work, maybe. And that, again, kept me going. And then the final bit, which sort of turned it, was that I had multiple people saying to me, even still, though, they said, well, this looks really great, and this is actually exactly what I need, but I'm not going to use it. And they said, like, if you ran it as a service, I'd pay you to use it, kind of thing. But like, I don't want to be running another server, another thing I have to monitor to watch. And that was really interesting, because when I heard that, a few times, I thought, oh, that's interesting. And that's where I sort of got the idea that, well, maybe this has like a long-term future as like part service, part software. Because
there's a couple topics in there. It's like, it sounds like this was your, and I don't want to say this negatively, maybe it's just say it is the easiest way. Like, this sounds like this is the first, in quote, successful open source project you've had. So something that's definitely like opened your eyes to, how open source works and how to, interact with the community, or even take in suggestions like, switching to Jest for testing or whatever. And then also it's opened your eyes to how potentially this open source thing that you created as a scratch your own itch that you never really seemed like you were like, hey, I can make a business out of this, now has some entrepreneurial business opportunities for you that you're now, either planning or investigating, like at least opening your eyes to it. So twofold there's like your first step into open source, and then now it can be something that can actually turn into a service. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, these were sort of like turning points. Like if I didn't have those motivations, I wouldn't have put probably more time in it, would not have got as many people and so on. So, chance and luck plays a big part in this sometimes.
This episode is brought to you by Glyphy. Glyphy is the easiest way to visualize any idea. Use Glyphy to diagram UML diagrams, flowcharts, org charts, wireframes, and more. And in this segment, I'm talking with Mike Sample, a fellow listener of this podcast, as well as the engineering manager at Glyphy, who leads their drawing platform team. And I asked Mike why he thinks Glyphy is an important tool for developers.
Why I think Glyphy is important. I've been involved in a tremendous number of development projects, and invariably, that process involves a lot of the front loading of imagining what a complex enterprise software system looks like. You're dealing with a lot of people. You have a limited amount of time to ship product. Both the product is complex, the process is complex, and most importantly, the communication is very complex. And what I found with Glyphy and what others have found is here's a tool to visually represent very complex processes in a way that everyone can immediately kind of coalesce around. It provides this kind of common visual language for understanding really difficult topics and getting everybody on board so that they can see the road ahead.
Yeah, I agree. Being able to communicate visually and having this visual artifact to instantiate new ideas as well as document a source of truth so that whenever you need to go back to a workflow or something you haven't touched in a while, it's that source of truth for you. So tell me this, Michael, who's using this tool?
This is not a novel observation. I'm not the only one who uses this. It's a very easy tool to use. 4.5 million people use this tool for all variety of purposes, for creating org charts and flow charts and UML diagrams and floor plans, etc., on and on. I use it with my own team. Whenever I worked on any large enterprise software project, I always spent a little time kind of charting things out. Sometimes that's a pen and a napkin. Before I knew about Glyphy, now it's Glyphy. And it's easy to use. It's on a web page. I don't have to download software. I don't have to, learn some complex interaction in terms of manipulating shapes. It's just drag, drop, attach, move, label. It's very, very simple, and it's extremely powerful in terms of getting everyone to understand something at a very high level.
All right, it's easy to get started. Try it free in Atlassian, inside Confluence, or Jira, or online at glyphy.com/changelog. And as a special bonus, our listeners get 25% off 1 year of Glyphy in Confluence or Jira. And to get started or to find those details, it's all at glyphy.com/changelog.
All right, Rhys. Well, the front of the package says automated dependency updates. That's a very simple sentence, but undoubtedly there's a lot that goes into providing that either as a tool or as a service. Can you tell us, unpack it for us, and tell us how Renovate does what it does?
Yeah, sure. So one quite interesting thing is that the tool behaves basically the same as the app. The app is actually a thin wrapper around the tool. There is no fork going on or different behavior. So you could basically like uninstall the app and go back to self-hosting, and all the pull requests you have open and things like that will still be like valid and updated and so on. So pretty much everything I described covers both the tool or the app. And the way it works is that it at a base, it runs on a schedule, and I normally recommend to people 1 hour, but some enterprises run every 10 minutes. And it scans each repository for package files that it understands, like package.json, Dockerfile, Meteor, package.js files, Google's Bazel builder as well. And just recently added NVM, RC, and Travis.YAML files because people wanted to be able to upgrade their node versions in sync. And they can actually node versions can be found in many different places. So it scans for all the files. It extracts the dependencies that it finds. It applies a cascading config to it, which gives you a lot of power, but also complexity. And then, based upon how you've configured it, it looks up updates and determines what you should be made aware of. So it builds a list of, okay, well, this is what we need to do. Checks what's already there, and if anything needs updating or creating, then it does it. And it actually does this by keeping all the state in the repository. So the tool itself, you could say, is stateless in that it doesn't need any state file which could be corrupted or out of date. It actually uses GitHub's Git repository and the list of branches that have been created or pull requests that have been closed, and it basically uses that as its state. And so the naming of branches and the naming of the pull requests becomes quite important because they kind of become like lookup keys. But yeah, so it runs. And one difference in the web app is that it's been webhooked. So it listens to GitHub webhooks for every repository it's installed on. And if that webhook event looks meaningful, such as the person's updated a package.json file or they've updated their Renovate.json file, then it runs again on demand to update it. So then it's quite nice because if people edit their dependencies, all their pull requests get updated if necessary. If they change their config, then again everything gets updated if necessary. And then it also has a listener for npm JS. So it basically gets updates or notifications using a kind of subscribe notify approach of CouchDB. So it gets updates whenever any new package is updated. And we do keep a little bit of state, but it's in a way unimportant state. It looks for any repositories that had that dependency at the last time they ran. And if so, again, it puts them in the queue. So it means that if a package you depend upon on npm JS gets an update, then you can expect to see a pull request within minutes. This gets particularly helpful when you have multiple repositories that belong to the one like organization or the one project. An example is in GraphQL. There's a lot of GraphQL repositories using Renovate and the GraphQL guys, and they'll often do an update in one upstream repository, and then that flows down to a downstream one where it needs to get merged, and that might flow down to another one. And thanks to the webhooks, it means that that can be done in kind of minutes. And so it's almost like an alternative to the monorepo because at least you're not having to update it manually, and it happens within minutes. And that's a little like value added add-on of the app that you can't really do in like a stateless command line tool. It would need to be alive and listening, and you have to make sure it doesn't crash and all that kind of stuff that I take care of with the app.
Okay, so that's not exactly the way that I was thinking that it would work in terms of it's checking live, so to speak, each time it's run on a schedule, or if there's a webhook that comes in, of course, it knows that it probably sends the new version of that particular dependency. But when it does a full run on a specific project, or repo that you have, it's going to go to all the sources, and I guess in many cases it's just npm, and just check for the most recent version of that library. And it's going to do that for each of your dependencies each time you run it.
That's right.
Okay.
With with some caching and so on.
Yeah, so caching definitely important there. I was thinking of more of like the library's IO approach, where they're basically creating, a huge dependency graph in the sky of different libraries and versions, and they have all of that data on their own. And so then when it runs, it would kind of already be pre-existing, but that would require a centralized service and all that. So, okay, very cool.
Potentially even a lot of unknown, knowledge you didn't really need to have. Rhys's version is like on demand, and so it's
it's more pragmatic for what he's up to, and Libraries IO's mission is much bigger in terms of what they're trying to do. But
the stateless aspect of it, where the state is really in the Git repository itself, it makes some things difficult to do, but it also provides huge numbers of benefits, because you don't really, and you reduce the risk of kind of like corruption or state mismatches or things like that, given that every time it runs, it ensures that the correct view is there right now. So to give you an example, if there was some kind of error, it might be my error, it might have been a server-side error, like a bad response from GitHub when we looked up a changelog dot markdown. So if a pull request was created and the content of that pull request, which said, we're updating you from 2.1 to 2.2, and the changelog is empty, if the next time we run and that problem's been fixed, or maybe the person wrote the changelog, then that pull request gets like patched. So because every time it runs, it ensures that everything is kind of like correct at that point in time. It makes it quite like self-repairing. And if it like crashes halfway through for some reason, then there's no type of crash I'm aware of that causes any state problem that requires manual intervention.
It's also, I would think, would make the programming model, like the conceptual model in your head as you're writing that, which is a complex thing to run through, especially with having this transitive dependencies and everything. It's more simplified because you're guaranteed a known state at the start of every run, right?
Yeah.
It's all there. It's not going to change as you're running. Yeah.
I got a question on that front, Jared, since you mentioned that. Do you ever, considering how complex this is, and it's potentially always in your head, Rhys, and now that it's been open source and other people are contributing, do you ever put a visual to some of these things that like it's difficult to talk through? Because maybe a visual can say like, this is how the model works in a visual standpoint. Do you have things like that? Is that important to you? Visualizing workflows for this?
It isn't currently there, but it is quite a good idea. I mentioned earlier about it has a cascading config, and in my mind, I think of it as like I use a term like ridiculously configurable or something, meaning that you can control the functionality so much to the point that you can do things that are even like silly. Like you can write a rule that says, for like patch versions of this exact dependency inside dev dependencies in this package file, then do this kind of thing. Like you can, because it's, like CSS, it cascades. You can have global rules. You can have rules per package. You can have rules per path. You can have rules per dependency type. You can have then catch-all rules for packages. So you can use like regular expressions to define your matching rules and things like that. Because I found that so many people have a lot of like, in their requirements, they have a lot of like if else kind of requirements themselves, So like they'll start off by saying like, I just want to get an update every week. And it's like, yeah, that's easy. Just add, this preset, like schedule weekly. And then they're like, oh yeah, but like this package I need, that's my own package. And you're like, no problem. Okay, so add this exception to that rule, add this package rule. And then, oh yeah, but I only want to auto merge the minor ones, not the major. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. So then you set this, So when people have the freedom to describe, exactly what they want, then they end up having quite like a wicked set of requirements. When people realize that like they are in control of how Renovate behaves, then they start kind of getting more and more advanced. And some people have got like amazingly complex configuration files that Renovate dutifully implements and honors.
Yeah, I noticed on your sales page, or on your homepage, I should say, you use the adjective unopinionated, which seems like it's the opposite of what most softwares as a service, or even frameworks or whatever it is, people try to sell their software as opinionated. And most of us appreciate opinionated software because it has opinions, and that's like making decisions for us. And I found it interesting that you explicitly say this is unopinionated, and it sounds like the reason for that is because there's so much variance in the way that people want to handle their dependencies that, like, I guess the 80% solution is not good enough.
It is, exactly. The variance is huge, and it's very almost amusing at times, because I see people at the complete like opposite ends. I see people that want like the fire hose approach, separate everything, and then you see others that want to group everything together. You see people that want to have ranges in their package JSON, and others that say, no, let's lock this down to pinned exact versions. You see people that want to have a log file. You see people that say, I don't want to have a log file for this project, and things like that. So the opinions of other people are very wide. And I added I don't know if you saw this one, but I added a kind of like a motto for the tool maybe about a month ago, half as a joke, but it's warming on me, and I'm thinking of keeping it. And the motto of Renovate is flexible, so you don't need to be. And because that basically describes how I view with the users. Like, I don't want to be in arguments with them, convincing why they have to have a log file, or they should be pinning, or things like that, or why they should separate them so that one bad apple doesn't spoil. I just want people to be able to do what they want to do, and then maybe over time they'll realize, like grouping all of them together every week basically always results in a broken build, because at least one thing breaks, and I end up merging nothing. So the person that at first is very resistant and say, this will be disruptive, changes their mind and says, okay, well, maybe we'll just group all the minor updates then, and then over time they'll be like, I'm still getting a lot of breaks. And, all this disruption they thought would happen by having separate pull requests actually is outweighed by the disruption of them having to look through a pull request with like 12 different upgrades and figure out which one broke, versus, if you put them separately, and configured them to auto merge or something like that, you wouldn't have that problem. But, I'm kind of proudly in that sense, like flexible or unopinionated. It's like, you want to do it, you can do it. Like, I don't want to be in the game and trying to talking you into why you should do the one way that I think is best.
Right. You let people learn on their own by trial and error. Definitely
And for sure, like not everybody's going to, converge on the same behavior either. There's definitely still
ask that, like, but is there a best practice that what it is, and you just letting people, everybody's going to eventually get there? Because if that's the case, then you might as well just, start preaching and like get people there faster.
Look, occasionally, yes. So, like, for example, I think that you should always have a log file, but there's some very smart people who've written a lot of great software better than mine who think that libraries should not have log files. Because then they think that, if you're not getting the random roll of the dice when you npm install, like your users are, then you're going to be, seeing something different to what they see. Yeah. For example, that's their argument. There's other things, like I think that pinning your dev dependencies makes a lot of sense. Like the reason why you don't pin dependencies at sometimes is because you have downstream users and you don't want to be unnecessarily restrictive of your downstream users.
Right.
They may end up with duplicates or whatever. But your dev dependencies never leave your project. And it makes sense to be like, this is the exact dev dependencies that we know, are working for us right now.
I've definitely been in the situation as an end user of a library trying to upgrade, and the library I'm depending upon pinned their dependency, right, too tight. Whereas there was no reason for it besides that's just the version that they were on when they last released. And you could go run their test suite against the new, even if it's just a patch. I think it was just a patch, and it works just fine. And it's like, if they would have just loosened that or not had it at all, then I would have been able to upgrade without having to bug them. But because they did pin it, now I need my dependency to unpin it or update before I can even continue with my work. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
What is the process of pinning? What is that?
So at least in Renovate terms, that's when you install Renovate, and Renovate says like, well, now that you're automating this kind of stuff, you can pin dependencies. And that would mean that, for example, rather than having like a range that says ESLint 4.0.0, with a caret, that instead you would say like ESLint 4.2.1 or something like that. And then at your choosing, based on your configuration, when you want to update ESLint, you can do so, and you might upgrade to 4.3.0 or something like that. ESLint itself is maybe not a good example, but a better example might be, say, if you use like ESLint config like Airbnb or something like that, because those ones are quite, opinionated. And the whole point of many of the releases of those, presets for ESLint is that they're introducing new rules or stricter rules, or they're catching something bad that they were missing before, So the whole point of a linter, in a way, is to break your build. But it's not very nice if you kind of have like open ranges in the log file. And so, users come along and run install and try to run a test, and they find that like the lint fails because a new rule got introduced, without explicit, approval or merging. So that's an example of where like you want to pin that down, because like nobody gains from just having like a random new version appear in some people's computer while, others have a cached older version and say, no, it works on my machine.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, nothing but trouble. So we've been talking specifically in the context of NPM and package.json. We haven't asked you yet if Renovate supports other package ecosystems or if it's just NPM.
Yeah, so the two major ones are NPM and Docker, but it's definitely in, my goal is that Renovate becomes a kind of a universal tool, universal in terms of language and as well as in terms of platforms. Because like apart from GitHub, it supports already GitLab and VSTS, and Bitbucket support is like in a pull request. So my goal is to make it cross-platform and cross-package manager. So we've already added Docker support, and there's requests for others like like Python or Java ones like Maven and things like that. So the goal is to make it essentially like a universal approach to that.
Did you have that goal from the start, or is it at least when I think of expanding beyond kind of where you are, I think of I hope the architecture is set up to be pluggable to a sense, and not like, okay, in order to support Python, for instance, we're going to have to rewrite 60% of our code base to do that.
Yeah, so it definitely was not in my foresight at the start. Like most of the features of Renovate, they've come from users suggesting it. It's been very much like a user-driven thing, and almost every time a user wants a feature and I figure out a way to kind of gracefully add it, I kind of breathe a sigh of relief that whatever choices I made previously weren't too limiting. So yeah, it's a bit of luck there. It started with NPM only, and then someone came along and asked if I could support Meteor. And because Meteor itself was really just referencing NPM dependencies, it was like 30 lines of code in about 6 different files, and it was done. When Docker came along, that one came along because people were chatting in maybe a blog post or something. It was in a discussion, something like that. And they were talking about the challenges of keeping Docker dependencies updated, in particular the hashes. Because even though most people use Docker tags, like even if you use a tag like 8.9.4 for Node.js, that itself, that's not an immutable tag like in NPM. Like if 8.9.4 or something gets published to NPM, that's always going to be the same. Whereas in Docker, those may look like a sem verb, but it's really just a tag, and you can change anything underneath a tag. So the only way to have like immutable references in Docker is to have like a SHA 256 hash, which is like enormous, and it's very unuser friendly. And someone actually commented that like, well, it's a pity like there isn't like a Renovate for Docker, and like sort of mentioned me or something like that. And that's how Docker support came about, because I thought, yeah, that's really good, because, when we look at like package JSON dependencies, in a way you could argue that we're just automating something that people could do manually. Like you're automating a feasible manual job. When Docker and you have these big long hashes, that's starting to get to the line where it's like this automation is now essentially making something possible that really isn't feasible manually. Looking up hashes and pasting them in and not making a mistake, and like, that's getting a bit beyond what's reasonable. And that's why hardly anybody actually uses hashes. Whereas now when people say use Docker files with Renovate, and they start with, even if they have like node latest, even though they want to like, do it that way, at least now it'll pin node latest, at hash. And so every time node latest actually changes, you get a pull request that kind of tells you it's changed. You can see if it still passes or doesn't break anything. So even if you want to be, non-semver versioning, you can still get updated whenever that hash is changed, whenever that tag on Docker Hub. I did some sort of refactoring recently to make it a lot easier to add languages in. And there's someone who's told me that he thinks he can add in Docker Compose support pretty easily now, given that there's already Docker there. So hopefully we'll see a lot more languages added a lot more quickly now that the code is a little bit more welcoming of like outside languages and package managers.
Yeah. So you mentioned that with package.json, you're basically automating something that people could do manually. And I'll tell you right now that you're automating something that I do manually for our application, which is, I just go in there every once in a while. So we have Elixir app, which also has JavaScript, as all web apps have JavaScript somewhere in the mix. And so we have a mix.exs, which is the Elixir side, and we have a package.json. And Adam and I were just talking about this, like how do we keep up with the Joneses?
You sound
like,
frustrated just describing it.
Well, it's not like it's fun. It's not fun work. I do it manually, because I haven't seen a compelling tool that will do it automatically. So this will work for our package JSON. I would implore you to add Elixir support, or I would sign up on a list of people who will wait for that eagerly. Although admittedly not probably high on your list in terms of language penetration, but it's just a task. But it's one I'm kind of I don't know, maybe a pedantic, like obsessive control or developer kind of person, and so like I want to see what actually is changing, and I want to like pick and choose. Yes, we want this update. No, we don't want that update. And so I probably would have like the super complex configuration.
Yeah. I mean, once people learn that they can control it, they start like really going for it and adding exceptions to rules, and
it's a whole new yak shave. Yeah.
Look, one of the points on the Renovate repository, I say like Renovate's approach, where I tried to describe like what's my kind of like philosophy. And the first point is that I believe that everybody can benefit from some level of automation. And like if the way Renovate works now, whatever reason you say that's not really for me, well, if it truly isn't for you, then I kind of think, okay, but I bet you, tell me what would be for you, because like I guarantee you that absolutely zero automation is not the best for you. I mean, like looking up the changelog for each dependency, figuring out which file the source repository uses for changelog, like, and then clicking and then manually looking at the delta. Yeah. Instead of just like a pull request that actually captures it. Yeah, that's why I think like everybody can benefit from some level of automation. It's up to me to try and make sure that like I provide the capabilities that I can do that.
Right. So there's some automation built into the package managers, right? So I don't go and look up all the dependencies and see, like I run either mix hex.outdated or yarn outdated or something, and it will show like the version, right, the differences. And then what I'll do is I'll just like update one, run the test suite, see what happened. Maybe while it's running, I'll go check their changelog. So like there are some tooling around that, but I'm sure I'm doing way more work than I should be.
Yeah. There's a couple different points to consider here. Like one, it's the wasted time. And potentially time is
which
money.
Is money.
Right. Yeah. So the wasted time and the money, doing something manually that you could potentially automate if you feel comfortable with it, or the extreme flip side is just not doing it at all. And it's like, I'm just never going to care. I'm just going to keep moving forward. And, in your case, Rhys, you'd mentioned like you'd seen some earlier on in the story, you mentioned how you'd seen some breakage and you're like, well, what's the thing? And it's because something wasn't updated. It's probably because you were not doing it at all. So you got Jareds who are going to do it manually until something like this comes around. You got people who are extreme want to automate it, but they want to start extreme with the configuration. They want to highly configure it and then start to maybe loosely unconfigure themselves because they've become more comfortable with it. Then you got those who don't do it at all. But either way, you got this manual process that essentially wastes time and potentially a lot of money. I mean, could we quantify how much time and money has been wasted doing what is now automatable, if that's a word?
Yeah, well, it's pretty hard to quantify, but there's certainly a lot of different ways to look at it.
That would be an interesting perspective on your site. I mean, that's a selling point because, like, if you could say, I'll save your organization this because you've researched, all the just like Nadia did, Jared, with that hypothetical number way back with open source, which isn't a point I'll drive home here, but look it up if you want to. But the point is like you can like to some degree
get a proxy for it. Yeah,
get a proxy for it and share that, and then quantify it for each individual team or repo or project or company. And let that be the selling point. Yeah. We could save you X.
Yeah. By the way, you're right. I mean, this is getting into marketing, but I just was reading this week and I put a to-do that says like, you should focus on like what it does for people, not like what the features are kind of thing. And that's pretty much like what you're saying now. One of my favorite anecdotes, and I've been tempted to like put this on the webpage, at least on the renovateapp.com, is from Equifax. You guys know about, the unprecedented
we're aware.
Leak of personal details. Yeah.
Yes.
So the ex-CEO who retired after it happened, when he testified, I think it was Congress, I forget exactly, but he basically said that, well, this was caused because one individual in our development team did not pay attention to a notice that said we should update our web server version. And it's all his fault.
Wow.
So basically that entire leak of like half of America's social security numbers was blamed on like there was a single developer who, missed a notice. And like, I mean, that's a process failure. You can't say, I'm blaming one guy because he missed an email or something like that. I mean, it's probably more than email, but the reality is that like if you don't have automation, you are going to risk having those types of things happen to you. I mean, you kind of need to keep up with patches or you'll eventually have problems. That's pretty much a solid rule.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at GoCD. GoCD is an open source continuous delivery server built by ThoughtWorks. GoCD provides continuous delivery out of the box with its built-in pipelines, advanced traceability, and value stream visualization. With GoCD, you can easily model, orchestrate, and visualize complex workflows from end to end. It supports modern infrastructure with elastic, on-demand agents and cloud deployments, and their plugin ecosystem ensures GoCD will work well in your unique environment. To learn more about GoCD, visit gocd.org/changelog. It's free to use and has professional support for enterprise add-ons available from ThoughtWorks. Once again, gocd.org/changelog.
So Rhys, with Renovate and really with all dependency management, as you've found, which is why it's so unopinionated, the devil's very much in the details. And you can shoot yourself in the foot, whether you're going the manual route, probably the automated route. If you're going the don't upgrade route, you're definitely shooting yourself in the foot. But a lot of the details have to do with, versions themselves, their meaning. What I think is 1.0 is different from what you think is 1.0. I even have a hard time deciding when I depend on a library. How do I decide, like, how volatile is this? And, what should I pin it to the patch? Should I allow up to the major? What are your thoughts around that with versioning and what it all means.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, to paraphrase a saying about democracy, I think Semver is the worst form of versioning except for all the others. And that's basically how I look at it, because there's lots of challenges, there's lots of things going wrong, but like right now it's still like the way to go. It's not anything to throw out. But the challenge is that I think there can be a mismatch between people's expectations about Semver. Like, is Semver for like the consumer, or is it for like the producer of the packages? And you use the word volatile, which is actually a really good one to include there, because Semver works on major, minor, patch. And in recent years, there's been a movement to sort of clarify that a little as being like breaking, feature, fix, right? Mapping to the major, minor, patch. But like to give an example, if I have a JavaScript library and I do nothing except for deprecate support for Node 4, I just say, okay, I'm not going to support that from now on. Is that a major, minor, or a patch? Wasn't meant to be a trick question. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a deprecation. So I would think that is a patch. You're not even doing anything.
No, it's a major because it is a breaking functionality.
No, you're just deprecating it though.
Sorry. We're removing support for it.
Oh, okay.
Node.js
so yeah, that would be
it's no longer supported. I mean, I'm not saying something breaks, but
okay. So yes, if you're removing support, then that's definitely a breaking change.
Like you shouldn't keep. You should. Yeah.
I thought you were just notifying of an upcoming breaking change. Okay, so you got me.
So we saw that a lot. So we saw people remove 4. So it's a breaking change. But I mean, if you're not using Node.js 4, what's the volatility of that? It's like 0. I mean, it's not a risk to you. Like none of the actual code changed. It was just saying, well, we're not going to keep supporting Node 4 from now on. So if you're using it, don't upgrade to this major version. Now, the next thing is, let's say I add a new language support to Renovate. But like I put it behind a feature flag. It's isolated into one file. And it does nothing unless you actually enable that feature.
Okay.
Is that? I mean, that's a minor. I've added a feature, right? But
yeah,
what's the risk of that? It's behind a feature flag. It does nothing unless it's turned on. I mean, the risk to you as an existing user would be like, well, I don't care. I mean, like realistically, that's a very low risk to you.
Shouldn't that be how every minor is, that there's new functionality, but there's no risk in upgrading? Because
ideally, but you can also have features that might touch like 20 files or things like that. So I'm giving you the example of the simplest of features, but it is a feature. Now I'll give you the final example. Let's say I've got like an edge case, a corner case that's really complicated and really nasty to try and fix. And it takes me like 17 files of touching to add like an extra state across the whole app to remove it. Now that's considered a fix, but like that one's the highest risk of all of them because I've had to touch 17 files. And I tell you, I've broken things with fixes. That's just how it is.
Right.
But like when I'm trying to work out my versioning, I feel compelled by this, concept that I should be following like breaking, feature, fix. So, if I'm truly fixing an edge case, I don't want to call that a feature, or people will say, well, who are you trying to kid? That's a bug. Well, but the reality is, you as the consumer, forget all of the breaking, feature, minor, major. All you're trying to do is, like you said, volatility. You just care, like, what's the chance it's going to break me?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really all you care about. And that's where Semver is kind of not working for us very well, because as the end user, you just want to know your risk level. And like breaking, feature, fix is a good like general rule, but it lets you down in so many times. And that's the biggest problem we have with Semver right now, is that like we could do a better job somehow, and I don't have the implementation idea. We could do a better job of the producers being able to communicate risk to the consumers, and the major and minor patch by using feature and fix. That's not really working very well today.
What if we could add, so instead of saying, well, let's throw Semver out and do something, I know you're not saying that, but like, let's have another standard that's better. What if we added more metrics in addition to Semver, so that still is there to communicate the intentionality of the release, right? Is the feature, what was the first one? Feature, something, fix. Major, minor,
breaking,
patch.
feature, fix.
Yeah, breaking, feature, fix. That's our intentions. So we continue to do that. We release things according to our intentions. Yeah. But we have tooling around the history and the changes and all that. And so maybe in addition to that, you have additional metrics. Like this is a patch according to what it did, but it also, added 17 files and touched 60% of the code base. That would give you like the things that you're describing to me.
Yeah.
Because we can automate all that. That could just, that's what
exactly
our tooling does already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Flesh it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I kind of really firmly think that everybody can need a little bit of automation, even if it's just something that's giving you a report about the like estimated stability of this fix. Is it a typo or is it, 17 files?
Yeah. I like that. Everybody could use a little automation or automatability. I think is what you said. I like that.
Yeah.
Rhys will go these one-liners, man.
Yeah, we'll quote you on that.
He's flexible, so we don't have to be.
I like also that you talk about the risk management too, because that's something you don't really consider. Is like that's one thing Jared and I talked about in the pre-call was like, it's essentially risk management of like how far you're willing to go, like how configurable you make Renovate for yourself. It's curbing risk management.
And the ultimate extreme is this auto merging.
Yes.
Feature, which seems scary to me. Can you tell us about that? Because that's like, going back to our conversation months ago, Adam, about looping with.
That's right, Tim Mecklin.
Thank you, Tim. Where they would close the loop on their diabetes machines. What are those called? I'm dropping the ball on it, but
geez, I don't remember.
The ultimate was to close a loop where it would actually regulate things for you. In your body. And that was scary. Auto merging to me is like, okay, at least let me look at the thing before it gets merged. But if it goes well enough, tell us about that feature.
Yeah. So to give you just some perspective, auto merge is where you give Renovate the permission to merge a new version, to your master branch or whatever is your base branch, if it passes your tests. So you do these for ones that you're confident of. And for example, like dev dependencies, or if you're updating Jest, you're updating ESLint. I mean, if you've got a new version of ESLint and all the tests pass, I mean, are you really going to inspect anything else? So the rule that we use is like, if you were just going to click that merge button anyway, why don't you save yourself the trouble? And if you want to really get out there, there's the option to do what we call a branch auto merge, where it just creates a branch. And if the tests pass on the branch, it does a merge onto your master without even raising a pull request. So you reduce your noise. So that's auto merge. And right now, actually, when I look at like the statistics, we have about a 2-to-1 ratio between manual merge and auto merge. So like that's like thousands a week are being auto merged by people. So it's people are feeling safe enough to be increasing that.
Nice.
That's an interesting metric too to use for getting people's buy-in to say, what the ratio is between the risky, which is auto merge, to the, the Jareds that will inspect it manually and or just do it the other way.
Yeah. Like I try to force myself. Whenever I like merge a pull request, I think to myself, have I ever like looked into that? Like, have I ever spun up a VM and checked that it still works, the whole search, this, that, or am I just clicking merge? I mean, and waiting for someone else to find it. And if the answer is like, I'm not actually spending that time, then, I may as well let the bot be, negligent, not myself, if that's the way I'm going to be.
Especially, I mean, if you're branching, you're testing and you're merging and then you're merging back to master. Yeah. I mean, it's fairly easy. It is Git. You can roll back. I mean, right. I mean, so it'd be different if it was like a permanent change you could never, revert back to. But I guess if you're several commits down the line and maybe 2 deploys later, I don't know, maybe it's too far back to really do that. Maybe it gets more complex infinitely. Yeah. But for the most part, it is Git. And that's the point of Git, is to be able to roll back changes. So
to give you a little insight into the future of Renovate as well, is that what I want to do is augment that such that, because now we have some scale. So there's now around 5,000 repositories using Renovate on GitHub alone. So that gives me some really good statistics. And what I want to be able to do is allow people to configure auto merge rules that say, well, if it passes my tests and passes, an expected number of everybody else's tests, then merge it. I mean, if for ESLint, you don't really care, but say if it's a new version of like, the Angular core or the React core, then it would give you the ability to say like, auto merge it if it passes like, 95% of tests. Or in the future, you might say auto merge it if like 30% of everybody else has already merged it. to allow people to have these kind of metrics that give you more like feeling of surety or safety. I think that's sort of that's part of the future of the automation.
That's really interesting, actually. I mean, you're using the wisdom of the crowd and like past performance to say 90% of people, auto merge this.
Yeah.
Where would that UI surface at?
Well, it would basically still be configuration. I mean, that you can configure thresholds. That's my intention.
Where would you communicate that information, like the wisdom of the crowd? Where would that be communicated?
In the pull request.
Okay.
And I saw a nice trick that TJ Hlawaichuk uses for something he does in GitHub polls, and he actually embeds SVG files, as an image into GitHub issues. And if you're using his GitHub polls, and that is feeding back to a Lambda function that polls DynamoDB. And so basically it gives you like a dynamically updating, issue comment where you don't have to rely on a bot to be continually refreshing you and saying, okay, now 843 people tested. It's actually an image, and the image, every time you refresh, pulls the latest number from the backend.
That is super cool. Can you get us a link of that in action so we can include it in the show notes and check it out ourselves? Because that's a great idea.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a really innovative idea. Yeah. I'm actually considering, making half of the pull request being essentially like a text SVG, so that you can kind of be able to dynamically update the information in a pull request description, graphs and so on, without actually needing to continue to be like hitting the GitHub API to be annoying people by popping it into their newsfeed or whatever.
I think it's interesting too how hackable SVGs are.
Yeah,
I've seen some really interesting stuff like this included, as well as I think the way CodeSponsor did their thing with SVGs, like that was really inventive. Like, no one would ever thought of that, and Eric did, and that was really cool.
Yeah, sorry if I can just add one more thing. I think one of the challenges with the updates, and this is the hesitance that like everybody has, or sometimes it's the fatigue they have after the initial, positivity, is that the updates become like a bit like a fire hose. And I think that, automation 1.0 is sort of like, whenever there's an update, here it is. It's in your face. But I've continually worked to try to have ways to reduce that noise. And so auto merging is really one of those, because like if you can auto merge it without you needing to do something, then that's one. But other ways include like grouping and scheduling. So for example, you can say like, don't submit any new pull request during our working hours, which also has a benefit, meaning that your CI machines can not be holding you up with, application code during working hours as well. So grouping, scheduling, auto merging, these are all ways to try to kind of reduce that noise, and I think reduce people's frustration that, you don't have to have the fire hose. If somebody says to you, are you interested in getting healthy, and you say, yeah. And then they say, okay, well, the only solution is 5 a.m. boot camp every day. And you're like, that's a little bit extreme. And so if you say to people, are you interested in keeping updated? And they say, yeah. And then you say, okay, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to hit you with a pull request every single hour of the day, then that's like the equivalent of this 5 a.m. boot camp. So
right.
Some people want it. Some people want that. But by having that flexible configuration, they can just be like, you know what? Let's make dev dependencies weekly. Let's make them monthly or something. They have that flexibility to be able to just schedule things down.
I want the version that's likened to the machine that you walk into, and it has a nice like rubber belt that just jiggles. You know those things? They just jiggle the fat right off. Yeah.
That's not real, Jared.
Give me that version of automated dependencies. Just the fat. Just jiggle the fat right off my app, will you?
Oh my gosh. I thought you were going there, but you didn't. That's a good one. I like that.
My app, Adam.
Yes, your app. Well, Rhys, I think maybe I'm jumping the gun here. If we have more to talk about in this subject, we can. But I think, this is, during this conversation, I've been revealed through discussion and your excitement for this, that there's a serious business here for you. And you potentially accidentally stumbled on an open source itch that could very likely be a business. But that's kind of scary, because you're going to build this business potentially around somebody else's product. And, kind of volatile ecosystems, and Jared asking you for Elixir support. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
How much money do I have is the question.
It's exciting as well as a little bit, stressful, because, the concept of like monetizing open source can be a hot topic at the best of times. But as I mentioned earlier, the epiphany to me was when somebody said, like, this is exactly what I want, but I won't run it. If you run it, I would pay you. And then I realized, okay, this is why I'm going to work on this because it's fun. But I think it tends itself towards being a service. And it also tends itself, as we just talked about, towards having a network effect where the more people using it, the better it can be for everybody. And that's essentially been the motivation. But until now, I've been running it as a free app. It currently supports around like 500 installs and about 5,000 projects on GitHub, which is quite a lot of scale, and at least to me. But
that's a lot.
I think so. I'm pretty chuffed with it. Like I still remember when each day you see it go from like 25 to 26 or something like that, So yeah, it's been going very well, but
plus with some big names using it, you got Algolia, Google Chrome Labs, Mozilla. You mentioned Angular, so you have like some very significant projects that are dependent on this. Yeah.
It's super exciting whenever I see big names on the installs. It's very like flattering almost, and it's really nice.
How do you track the installs? Is it currently a service, or these are like their own installed versions of it, or is it?
Oh yeah, right. So these are actually only the people who have installed Renovate on public repositories on GitHub. I have not that probably anybody's read it, but I have a point in my terms and conditions that say, if you install Renovate on a public repository, we have the right to use your logo and your name without further permission. But, if you hate that, you can tell us and I'll remove it within 7 days. So I put that because, it's better to beg forgiveness and ask permission. So that list of customers is actually, or I should say users, no one's paying. That list of users is, that's only ones that have installed it publicly. I actually have, there's how would I say, there's other there's other unicorns, we'll say, that are like, running it privately that I'm aware of, but I don't put their logo up because I haven't asked them, and it's self-hosted, so
right.
That's their own business.
So I guess the way then to get this into an open source application is to go to github.com/apps/renovate, which is linked to from your README. And that's the way there's a big green button up in the top right. You click install, and then you choose the repository to install it into. Is that the process? Yeah,
that's right. I mean, GitHub gives you the option of either installing it on all repositories or selectively, picking them one by one. That interface is not particularly friendly, so a lot of people end up, ticking all out of convenience. But yeah, basically you install it, you pick which repositories you want it to run on, and the next thing that happens is it gives you like an onboarding pull request. And that one does nothing except say, okay, here's our recommended default config, and if you use this, then here's what will happen next. You'll expect like 7 pull requests, and here's what they'll look like. It gives people the ability to then edit that pull request, edit the config, to add these exceptions, these configurations, and Renovate will then run immediately and like give you an updated, prediction. So like if you started with here's your 7 pull requests, and then someone adds a preset that says group all together, then, it'll hopefully within like a minute or something, will update to then say you'll have 1 pull request called update all packages. So it's like a sort of like an interactive onboarding where nothing happens until you then click the button to merge.
What happens? I guess the first step is to either choose all or choose the repo. Then you have to add a config to your repo. Is that right? So that's actually a file that lives in your repo?
Yeah, that's right. It is actually possible to run it without a config file. So if you actually just close that onboarding pull request, that's good enough to get it to start. I mean, because you've already installed it on the repo, so clearly you want it.
Right.
So it is possible to do it without a config file. What that means is you just get the application defaults. And those are the ones which I'll call, fairly unopinionated. Over time, over major releases, I've often changed default settings for configuration to make them sort of like, I'm trying to think how to describe it, less action, less action. I'm missing the word, but less volatile. Like it does less by default as each one goes on, meaning that people kind of opt in to things. So, for example, in the very earliest releases, it said it was a bit more opinionated and it said, let's pin everything, let's do this. Whereas now, you kind of have to like opt into that if that's what you wish. I mean, it'll attempt to auto detect.
I guess this couples with potentially a new announcement. I think this is fairly new for you too, which is, inclusion in GitHub's Marketplace. Do you want to speak about that? Can you talk about those details?
Yeah, absolutely.
How does that reflect back on the two different processes to install it, so to speak?
Yeah. So, to be a part of GitHub's Marketplace, you don't have to actually be like a GitHub app. You could be like an OAuth app or things like that. So the two are very closely related, but not like tied to the hip. So, if you go and install the app without going through the marketplace, it will install and run and give you the onboarding. And very soon, not today, but very soon, it'll start giving people polite reminders that it is necessary to select a plan. That's only if they're actually on a private repository, I should add. But so soon it'll start prompting people to say, like, Renovate is available on the GitHub Marketplace, please select a plan. And then eventually we'll run out of patience and say, well, you've got like 7 days left or something like that. So that's my planned approach to how to kind of nudge people onto the plans if their use is in private repositories rather than
this is only
source.
private repos, not open source.
Correct.
Repos.
Correct.
So that's a clear distinction there.
Exactly. I mean, and that's a pretty standard GitHub business, GitHub add-on business model is that like open source is always free.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have to have like reasonable use limits, but it's been going pretty well so far. Like I said, it's like about 5,000 projects, and that's been fairly manageable. So I think that we can continue managing with open source being free indefinitely.
Does it make sense to mention this? I don't know if this is like brand new or how long this will be real, but it seems like you maybe even have an opening special for personal plans. It's like $1 a month. Is that legit forever?
Yeah. So that's yeah. So it's challenging when you go from like a free offering to saying to people,
Give
can
me some
you pay
money.
me?
Yeah.
Exactly. And I thought that one of the nicest ways I could do that is in a kind of almost like a Kickstarter-like approach where it's like, your earliest backers, get the best price. And so that's why it's opened with this like opening special where it's a price that will be, as you were sort of asking, will be grandfathered in because that's actually GitHub's policy. GitHub's policy is that like if you sell someone a plan at price X, then you keep delivering it basically indefinitely until that person cancels it.
Yeah.
And that works really well because what that is allowing me to do is to offer this kind of opening special prices, and I can, starting tomorrow, I'll be pointing some of the people I know have been using it for a long time and saying, hey, like sign up with this, you'll get that price forever, and thank you for being, helping promote Renovate. And I thought that, having this kind of carrot approach to pricing rather than the stick approach, which says like pay up now or else you've had long enough, I thought that might be a nice way of kind of transitioning where you offer the existing users a price that they know is really, really fair.
$1 a month is really fair.
Yeah,
for most.
I mean,
things.
that's the
personal plan.
That's for the personal accounts. And like I remember, I would have been willing to pay like $5-10 minimum kind of thing. So I'm like, I think $1 is good, and people can sign up and lock that in. And another reason for charging $1 and not saying free is that I know that like if I sign up to a service and they've got like a free plan that suits me, I always have a concern that like one day they're going to say, you know what, we can't keep offering that, and it's now like $35 a month. Or something like that. Like they'll go from free to a price that is just not valuable to you. It doesn't match with the value. So I personally prefer to have something where I can be like, okay, I'm a paying customer of them, and I get this price, and I know that they'll hopefully, there's a good chance that they'll grandfather that in. So that's another part of my line of thinking is that. Not so much just like, oh, I worry whether they'll be sustainable because $1 a month's not really going to help with that. But it's more like, but I know I've got a price locked in, and that I like. So this is the approach I'm taking.
So, I mean, I know it's tough to ask this question, and I won't ask you for the 5-year plan, but give me some time span that's reasonable for you to share with the listening audience, like where Renovate is going, where you have dreams about going, and considering now you're in Marketplace, it's becoming a paid for product that can sustain itself and grow. Like, what are some plans? What's on the horizon for you? What's next?
Yeah, so I obviously hope that there will be a good take up from the marketplace. The marketplace itself can be very good exposure. People finding it via the marketplace that wouldn't have otherwise heard about it. Like you guys hadn't heard about it, for example.
Right.
We should hear about it, right, Jared? I mean,
yeah.
I'm glad Nicholas told us, because without Nicholas, we'd be in the dark still yet.
That's right.
Yeah.
We need this. We need
Thank you, Nicholas.
Yeah. So look, my long-term, longish term, I should say, plan for Renovate is fundamentally it remains an open source first tool with a very good core that you can run yourself, if that's what you want to do. I plan and hope that a lot of people would prefer to have the app. Like, I'm only aware of one company who is running their own app, their own, bot, whatever you want to call it, on like github.com, meaning that most people, it is free, but I still think that the convenience of having someone else watch it, monitor it, alarm it, and things like that, and save the logs, I think that'll benefit. I also plan to add some things to the app that, are not really easy to do in like an open source, like, command line tool. And that's things like a web interface to view a history, like were there any like failed attempts yesterday, or what was the log from 3 hours ago when it created this pull request that looks a little bit weird to me, things like that. And that's only possible when you're like actually like keeping state, storing logs, providing a web interface, and so on. So I think that the tool can remain a very powerful open source tool, while the app can provide what you expect from an app, when things are as a service rather than just simply software.
Very cool. Well, I know I'm excited. I think this was an eye-opening topic for me, because automating something can be pretty scary. Like Jared said, he hasn't found a reasonable tool to do it for ourselves, so we've been basically wasting time and money. And I'd be excited to have Jared have more of his time back, so we can make some more money or find just different fun things to do. And it's just such a shame that there's so many, like, you just repeat that 50,000 times, many people wasting their time and money updating dependencies that, Renovate could save so much, out there, and automate it so much too. So,
yeah, my goal is that there's always some setting or some level that works for everybody. So, for anybody that thinks it's not right for them, I mean, I assume there must be something that is right, And, if it just did this, because we've got some ideas, and if I find that people like them, then I think there's a few other like approaches and models that could be used.
Yeah. Well, Rhys, thank you so much for sharing your story and your passion for this project, and your commitment to open source, and just sharing the details around a sometimes tough subject, of open source to business and how you balance all that. So I know it's tough, but thank you so much for sharing your time today and all your ideas with the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for your time as well.
All right, that's it for this episode of the Changelog. If you enjoyed this show, do us a favor, go into Apple Podcasts, go into Overcast, go into whatever app you're using, favorite it, like it, share it, tweet it, whatever. Just get it out there, share it with a friend, help us grow the show. And thank you to our sponsors, Linode, Glyphy, and GoCD. Also, thanks to Fastly, our bandwidth partner. Head to fastly.com to learn more. Rollbar takes care of our error monitoring. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we host everything we do on Linode cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Check them out. Support this show. The Changelog is hosted by myself, Adam Stacoviak, and Jared Santo. This edit was done by Jonathan Youngblood. Music is by Breakmaster Cylinder, and you can find more shows just like this at changelog.com, or on Overcast, or on Apple Podcast, or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Go there, search for the Changelog, you will find us. We'll see you next week.